Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and like this video now. The shot you just heard wasn't a celebration. It was the starting gun for the total, absolute demolition of a billionaire's life. Are you ready to witness the fall? The price of arrogance. At a table overlooking the dazzling lights of Manhattan, Vincent Sterling, an industry titan, raised a bottle of vintage crystal champagne to toast his mistress. He whispered promises of a future, a new life, a world built just for them. But what he didn't know was that miles away, in the cold silence of a law office in Boston, the woman carrying his unborn child had just set down her pen. With a single, elegant signature, Audrey Vance did more than just file for divorce. She activated a hidden clause in their ironclad prenuptial agreement, a clause he never bothered to read. And in one devastating moment, she legally seized control of his entire fortune. He was toasting his future, unaware that his past had already consumed him. Vincent Sterling didn't just live in New York. He owned a piece of its soul. His company, Sterling Capital, had its name etched into skyscrapers that scraped the clouds over Midtown. His personal residence was a sprawling penthouse in the Upper East Side, a nest of glass and steel with panoramic views of Central Park that made the city look like a jeweled carpet laid out for his pleasure. His wife, Audrey Vance, was often considered another of his perfect acquisitions. She was the daughter of an old New England money family. She possessed a classic serene beauty and a master's degree in art history from Yale that made her the perfect hostess. She could discuss Renaissance sculpture with the same effortless grace with which she managed a staff of 12. To the outside world, they were the definitive power couple, his relentless ambition balanced by her refined elegance. They were a fixture in Vogue America, a name whispered with envy at charity galas, the embodiment of the New York dream. But inside the golden cage, the gold was cold to the touch. Vincent saw Audrey not as a partner, but as a curator of his life. She managed the home, the social calendar, and his public image, all with an impeccable efficiency he simply expected. Their conversations had long ago devolved from shared dreams into logistical reports. "The Metropolitan Museum Gala is Thursday, Vincent," she would say in a quiet, even voice while adjusting a floral arrangement. "I've confirmed our table. You'll be seated next to the Treasury Secretary." "Fine. Make sure my tuxedo is pressed, the one with the silk lapels," he'd respond without looking up from the glossy screen of his tablet, where stock indices streamed like a digital waterfall. He spoke to her in the same concise tone he used with his executive assistant. For 5 years, Audrey played her role. She had mistaken his initial ambition for passion, his possessiveness for love. She had believed that beneath the armor of the predatory businessman, there was a man with whom she could build a life. But the armor was all there was. He was a man who collected beautiful things: art, cars, companies, a wife, and he expected them to remain pristine and silent. The loneliness was an entity unto itself, a constant silent guest in their cavernous home. She walked the marble halls, her steps echoing in the silence, feeling like a ghost in her own life. The only warmth she found was in the small sunroom she had converted into her personal library. It was in that sunroom, one crisp September afternoon, that everything changed. A subtle exhaustion had clung to her for weeks. A faint but persistent nausea greeted her every morning. She had attributed it to stress. But as she watered an orchid, a wave of dizziness so profound swept over her that she had to grip the back of a velvet armchair to steady herself. 2 hours later, she sat on the edge of her cold marble bathtub, staring at a small plastic stick in her trembling hand. A blue cross, unmistakable. Pregnant. An avalanche of contradictory emotions washed over her. There was a flash of primal, fierce joy. A baby. A life. A part of her that was not owned or curated by Vincent. But it was instantly followed by a wave of cold dread. How could she bring a child into this emotional vacuum? What kind of father would Vincent be? A man who saw family as a legacy, a dynasty, not as a source of love and warmth. She decided to tell him that night. She had their private chef prepare his favorite meal, seared scallops, followed by an aged Wagyu ribeye. She chose a bottle of his preferred Bordeaux, a 1998 Chateau Margaux. She wanted everything to be perfect, a soft landing for the news she hoped would bridge the chasm between them. He came home late, as usual, stripping off his tailored coat and tossing it to the housekeeper without a word. He entered the dining room, loosening his tie. "Long day," he grunted, sitting at the head of the long, polished table. "I understand," Audrey said softly. "I was hoping we could talk." "Is it about the gala? Because I told you I can't stand another one of your cousin's rambling speeches." "No, it's not about the gala," she said, her hands clasped in her lap. "It's something important, something personal." The chef served the scallops. Vincent picked at them, his eyes already drifting back to the phone he had placed on the table beside him. "Just tell me, Audrey. I have an early call with the Tokyo office." Taking a deep breath, she looked directly at him, her heart pounding. "Vincent, I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was dense and absolute. He stopped chewing. Slowly, he set down his fork and looked at her. He truly looked at her for the first time all evening. But the expression in his eyes was not joy or surprise or even curiosity. It was calculation. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, inscrutable smile spreading across his face. "Well," he finally said, picking up his wine glass, "that's efficient." Audrey stared at him, bewildered. "Efficient? Of course," he continued, swirling the deep red liquid. "It secures the Sterling legacy. Good timing, actually. We can announce it in the winter issue of Vanity Fair. It's good for the brand." He took a sip of wine, his gaze distant, already planning the press release. He hadn't asked if she was okay. He hadn't asked if she was happy or scared. He hadn't reached for her hand. He had assessed the news as a business transaction, a strategic move that benefited his empire. In that moment, watching him process the creation of their child as a PR opportunity, the last fragile thread of hope Audrey had clung to, snapped. The love she thought she felt for him, the love she had been trying to revive for years, curdled into something else. It was a cold, hard certainty. She was not his wife. She was his asset, and she was now carrying his most valuable asset yet. The golden cage had just turned into a nursery, and she knew with terrifying clarity that she had to find a way out, not just for herself, but for the small, innocent life growing inside her. 2-2. The Mistress and the Money Trail. Vincent Sterling's affair began, as many do not, with a bang of passion, but with the quiet hum of mutual appreciation for beautiful, expensive things. The object of that appreciation was Simone Moreau. Simone was not a vacuous model or a wide-eyed junior associate. Simone was a force of nature in her own right, the owner of a chic, minimalist art gallery in the Soho district called Moreau Modern. She was smart, ambitious, and possessed a predatory instinct for weakness. She and Vincent met when he was looking to acquire a major piece by an emerging German artist. Simone managed the acquisition. She understood that for Vincent, art wasn't about emotion. It was about conquest and investment. She spoke his language, the language of value, of scarcity, of owning something no one else could have. "Most collectors are just decorating," she told him one afternoon in her gallery. "They want something that matches their sofa. You, Vincent, are building a collection. You are shaping the market. He was hooked. Here was a woman who didn't just admire his wealth. She admired the mind that built it. Their professional meeting soon turned personal. A discussion about a painting turned into a long lunch at a trendy spot where her hand would linger on his arm a second too long. A late-night call about an auction dissolved into intimate conversations about their ambitions. She created a world for him that was an antidote to the sterile perfection of his life with Audrey. She was the perfect mistress. She was demanding in a way that fed his ego, requiring expensive gifts, luxurious travel, and exclusive access. But she never demanded the one thing he couldn't give her: legitimacy. He lavished her with gifts: a rare Patek Philippe, a classic convertible, a black American Express card linked to a private holding company to keep it off his main accounts. He was meticulous, he thought, about covering his tracks. The news of Audrey's pregnancy barely registered as a complication for his affair. If anything, it made his compartmentalization feel even more justified. Audrey now fulfilled her primary function: producing an heir. That was her world, his world, the one that made him feel truly alive, was with Simone. A week after learning he was to be a father, he was with Simone in her elegant Soho loft. He had brought her a bottle of crystal champagne to celebrate a massive deal closing. "To us," Simone purred, clinking her glass against his. "And to all the beautiful things we're going to acquire together." He kissed her deeply. "I have a surprise for you. I'm taking you to Paris next month, a private suite at the Ritz." "And what will you tell the wife?" she whispered against his lips. "A business trip, a conference in Geneva." He dismissed her. She doesn't ask questions. She knows her place. He believed it absolutely. He saw himself as a master puppeteer, moving the strings of his two separate worlds. Never once did he imagine that one of his puppets was about to cut her own strings and burn the entire stage to the ground. He was so secure in his deception, so blinded by his own arrogance, that he never saw the first loose thread. And it was a thread he himself had left dangling. Audrey had always managed the household finances. It was a role Vincent had delegated early in their marriage, not because he implicitly trusted her, but because he deemed it tedious administrative work beneath his station. He gave her access to all his personal accounts, confident that her old money sensibilities would make her a responsible, if uninspired, steward of his domestic spending. It was a colossal miscalculation. He had mistaken her quiet diligence for a lack of curiosity. The first thread appeared one Tuesday night. Vincent was in Chicago for a merger, and Audrey was in her study. The desk lamp's beam, the only illumination in the dark penthouse. The baby made itself known with a soft, persistent flutter, a secret conversation between mother and child. She was reviewing the monthly statement for their main Amex joint account, a task she performed with meticulous attention. She scanned the columns of figures: Bergdorf Goodman, the private chef services, a donation to the Philharmonic, the usual rhythm of their opulent life. And then she saw it. A charge for $75,000. The vendor was listed as Moreau Modern. Audrey stopped. She knew all the major art dealers in the city, and beyond. She had never heard of this one. It was a significant amount, too large for a casual purchase. Vincent hadn't mentioned acquiring a new piece. In fact, he had recently complained the art market was overpriced. Curiosity flared. She opened her laptop and typed the gallery name into the search bar. The website was sleek and aggressive, full of the kind of abrasive conceptual art Vincent always professed to hate. The gallery owner was listed as Simone Moreau. A photo showed a striking woman with dark, challenging eyes standing next to a sculpture that looked like a tangle of rusted metal. An uncomfortable, cold, sharp feeling pricked at Audrey's heart. It was just one charge. It could be anything. She tried to rationalize the suspicion away, but it was a loose thread in a perfect tapestry, and her fingers couldn't help but pull. Over the next few days, she started looking closer. She dug into accounts she hadn't reviewed in years, subsidiary accounts of his private holding companies, the ones he used for discreet investments. She cross-referenced tax IDs and bank transfer codes, using the financial acumen her father, a shrewd investor, had insisted she learn. What she found was a pattern. There wasn't a single charge. There were dozens dating back over a year, monthly wire transfers to a private account, all categorized under vague labels, like consulting fees or acquisition services. There were charges from luxury jewelers where she had never shopped, hotel bookings in cities where he had no business meetings, plane tickets scheduled for two that were never for her. And everything seemed to orbit around one name: Simone Moreau. The evidence was mounting, each discovery a small, sharp cut, but it was all circumstantial. The financial data could be explained away. Vincent was a master of plausible denial. She knew she needed something irrefutable. She needed to see it. The decision to hire a private investigator felt like a betrayal of the woman she used to be, the woman who believed in privacy and trust. But that woman was gone. Replaced by someone cold and clear-headed, she found a discreet firm run by a former NYPD detective named Robert Costa. She met him at an unassuming cafe in a different borough. She was dressed down, wearing sunglasses and a simple trench coat. "Ms. Vance," Costa said, his voice grave. He didn't sound impressed by her name. "What can I do for you?" "I need you to follow my husband," she said, her own voice steady, surprising herself at the lack of tremor. "I need to know where he goes and who he sees." A week later, a plain manila envelope arrived via courier. Audrey carried it to her sunroom, the only place that felt like hers, and sat down, her hands shaking. Inside were a dozen glossy photographs. The first showed Vincent entering the Moreau gallery, then photos of him and Simone laughing over lunch, her hand on his arm in intimate closeness. Another showed them leaving a hotel, not in Miami or LA, but the Hotel Carlisle, less than 3 miles from their own home. And then, the final photograph, the one that shattered everything. It was taken at night through the large window of Simone's loft. Vincent was standing behind her, his arms around her waist. He was kissing her neck, his eyes closed. Simone leaned back against him, a triumphant, possessive smile on her face as she looked toward her reflection, and by extension, the camera lens in the glass. It was a portrait of betrayal, raw and undeniable. Audrey let the photo slip from her fingers, scattering onto the floor. She didn't cry. The pain was too deep, too vast for tears. It was a hollow, resonant abyss opening inside her. Every shared memory, every anniversary, every hopeful moment of their 5 years of marriage was instantly recontextualized as a lie. His impatience, his scorn, his emotional distance. It all made sense now. He hadn't been busy. He had been abundant. He was living another life, a life he preferred, a life he had paid for with their shared money and her stolen trust. She sat there for a long time, the silence of the penthouse pressing down on her. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach, to the soft flutter that was now a constant comforting presence. She had been so naive. She had thought this child might be the glue that repaired the cracks in her marriage. Now she saw the truth. This child was not a bridge to him. This child was her anchor, her reason to escape. The sense of emptiness began to recede, and in its place, something new began to grow. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't despair. It was a slow, burning rage, hard as a diamond. He had called the news of their son efficient. He had reduced the deepest moment of her life to an entry on the balance sheet of his legacy. He had stood in this very home, under this roof, and lied to her day after day, while spending their fortune on his secret life. She rose and walked over to the scattered photographs. She picked up the last one, the image of Vincent and Simone in their embrace. She looked at his face, lost in his self-serving pleasure, and at Simone's face, smiling in victory. Both of them thought they had won. They thought she was a fool, a decorative, unconscious wife. They had underestimated her. Everyone had always underestimated her. That was about to become the most expensive mistake Vincent Sterling had ever made. 3. The unbreakable clause. Audrey's reckoning was a crucible. It burned away the soft, permissive parts of her and forged what was left into something sharp and unbreakable. The next morning, she did not confront Vincent. There would be no tearful accusations, no shouting. That was the drama he would expect, a scene he could manage, manipulate, ultimately discard. She was done playing scenes in his play. She was going to write her own ending. Her first call was not to a divorce lawyer. It was to Marcus Kane. Marcus was a legend in certain New York legal circles, a name whispered with a mix of fear and reverence. He wasn't a family lawyer specializing in amicable separations. He was a shark, a specialist in forensic financial litigation and the weaponization of complex corporate contracts. He had a particular disdain for arrogant new money titans like Vincent Sterling. They met in his office, a space that was the antithesis of Vincent's world. It was antique, with dark wood paneling, smelling of leather-bound books and quiet power. Marcus Kane was a man in his 50s, with piercing gray eyes and an unnerving stillness. He listened without interruption as Audrey laid out her story, her voice a low, steady monotone. She concluded by placing the manila envelope with the photographs on his polished desk. He glanced at the top photo, the embrace, and pushed the envelope aside. He didn't need to see the rest. Infidelity is predictable, Ms. Vance. His voice was dry. By itself, it's a weak negotiating position in this state. The emotional damage is immense, but the financial leverage is minimal. What else do you have? This was the moment. Audrey reached into her purse and pulled out a thick, bound document. Our prenuptial agreement, she said. Placing it on the desk, Marcus leaned forward, his interest finally piqued. He opened the document, his sharp eyes scanning the dense pages. Vincent's own lawyers, a team of aggressive corporate attorneys, had drafted it. It was, on the surface, an unbreakable fortress designed to protect Vincent's vast fortune, estimated at upwards of $2.5 billion. It stipulated that in the event of a divorce, Audrey would receive a one-time payout of $10 million, a pittance designed to buy her silence and a quick exit. Marcus read it, his expression grim. This is brutal, Ms. Vance. It's designed to leave you with next to nothing. Keep reading, Audrey said calmly. Page 47, Article 12. Marcus flipped to the page. His eyes narrowed as he read the clause, and then he read it again. A slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. He looked at Audrey, seeing her for the first time not as a victim, but as a fellow predator. My God, he whispered, the legacy clause. It was a piece of boilerplate language Vincent's own lawyers had insisted on including, a standard edition for dynasty-building patriarchs. Vincent, obsessed with his own legacy, had wanted to ensure the moral and financial integrity of the Sterling bloodline. Article 12, the Fidelity and Family Progeny Clause, stipulated that the main terms of the prenup would be voided under a specific set of circumstances. If the marriage produced a legitimate heir, and if Vincent Sterling was found to have engaged in spousal infidelity, that threatened the stability of the family unit during the heir's gestation period. An extraordinary measure would be triggered to protect the heir's birthright from the father's moral instability. The majority control of the Sterling Family Trust, the entity that held the majority of his shares in Sterling Capital, his real estate portfolio, and his liquid assets, would be temporarily transferred to the mother to administer until the child turned 25. It was designed to protect a dynasty from a womanizing father who might squander the family fortune. Mistresses or illegitimate children. Vincent had signed it with an arrogant flourish, so confident in his own infallibility and his ability to deceive that he had seen it as a testament to his own patriarchal virtue. He never imagined it could be used against him. He saw it as a shield for his heir. He never saw that Audrey would wield it as a sword. "He signed it," Audrey said, her voice cold as ice. "He was so proud of it. He called it securing the future." "This is not just a divorce filing, Ms. Vance," Marcus said, his mind racing, the thrill of the chase in his eyes. "This is a corporate takeover, a coup d'etat. It is beautiful." For the next 4 weeks, they worked in absolute secrecy. Marcus assembled a ghost team of forensic accountants and banking specialists. Their mission was to map Vincent's entire financial empire. Every shell company, every offshore account, every hidden asset. They found the holding company used to fund his affair, the one tied to the Black Amex. They tracked the wire transfers to Simone Moreau. They built an impenetrable mountain of evidence linking his infidelity directly to his financial assets, perfectly satisfying the clause's requirements. While they worked, Audrey played the hardest role of her life. She was the perfect, radiant, expectant mother. She discussed nursery colors with Vincent, feigned interest in his tedious stories about board meetings, and accompanied him to one last charity dinner, smiling placidly for the cameras, her hand resting on her gently swelling abdomen. It was a masterful performance. The closer the date drew, the more serene she seemed. Her calm unsettled Vincent, though he couldn't say why. He mistook her quiet resolve for contentment. The plan was a symphony of legal and financial maneuvers, timed to the minute. They couldn't simply file a motion. The moment Vincent was alerted, he would move his assets, hiding them in a web of international accounts so dense it would take years of litigation. The transfer of control had to be instantaneous and absolute. Marcus Kane prepared a set of documents. They were not divorce papers. They were framed as a standard update to the Sterling Family Trust, something a responsible father would do to optimize his estate for his unborn child. There were dozens of pages of dense legal terms, but buried within them were the triggering documents, the execution of the powers granted by Article 12, the irrevocable transfer of the voting rights of his shares, and Audrey's legal appointment as the sole trustee. "He will never read it," Audrey stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Men like him never do," Marcus agreed. "They see a stack of papers from their own counsel, and all they see is their own power reflected in it. They sign because they believe they are untouchable." The date was set, a Thursday, the day of the museum gala he was so annoyed about. Audrey knew he would be distracted, his mind on the boring courtesies of the evening, and no doubt on his plans with Simone later. The day before, Audrey went to her obstetrician appointment. She lay in the darkened room, the cold gel on her abdomen, and watched the grainy black and white image on the screen, a small, perfect spine, a head, the powerful, frantic beating of a tiny heart. Tears streamed down her face, the first tears she had shed in a month. They were not tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of fierce, protective love. "I am doing this for you," she whispered to the image on the screen. "You will never be just an asset. You will be safe. You will be free." She was no longer just escaping. She was building a fortress for her child. 4. The silent coup d'etat. The day of the signing was a masterpiece of orchestrated banality. The weather was a placid, indifferent blue, the kind of New York autumn day that felt full of promise. For Vincent Sterling, the promise was of an evening that would begin with a tedious but necessary appearance at the gala and end in the arms of Simone Moreau. For Audrey, it was the promise of liberation. She woke early, a quiet hum of energy beneath her tranquil exterior. She chose her outfit with deliberate care, a simple but elegant cream-colored cashmere dress. It was modest, maternal, and completely non-threatening. It was the costume for the final act of her performance as the dutiful Mrs. Sterling. Vincent was, predictably, in a foul mood. He stood in front of his dressing room, frowning at his tuxedo collection. "I hate this event," he grumbled, pulling one out. "All those self-important peacocks and stale conversation. It's 4 hours I'll never get back." "It's important for the brand, Vincent," Audrey said softly as she entered. "And you look so handsome when you're there." She adjusted the knot of the tie he hadn't yet put on, a small wifely gesture that seemed to soothe his ego. "I suppose," he conceded. "Just make sure we leave the moment it's acceptable. I have an early meeting tomorrow." It was his standard lie for a night with Simone. "Of course, dear," she replied. Her smile never wavered. Later that afternoon, precisely at 3:15 p.m., Audrey walked into Vincent's office. It was his sanctuary, a room of dark leather, polished chrome, and a singular, imposing desk that looked like a slab of black marble. He was on a conference call, pacing and barking orders. He waved her to wait, lifting a finger, annoyed by the interruption. Audrey sat patiently in one of the visitor chairs, her leather clutch pressed against her lap. She waited for 10 minutes, projecting an aura of someone who had nothing more important to do than wait for her husband's convenience. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating against the cage of her chest. This was the critical moment. If he resisted, if he chose to read, if even a flicker of suspicion crossed his mind, the entire plan would collapse. He finally hung up the phone. "What is it, Audrey? I'm swamped." "I'm so sorry to bother you, darling," she began, her voice soft and apologetic. "It's just, the lawyers sent this over. They said you needed to sign them before the end of the day." She opened her purse and placed the thick stack of documents on his desk. On top was a cover letter from the senior partner of his own trusted law firm, a name Vincent held on a multi-million-dollar retainer. Marcus Kane had brilliantly anticipated this, convincing a junior, heavily indebted associate at the firm to generate the letterhead and a boilerplate summary. The summary described the documents as the Sterling Provisional Trust, an update to safeguard assets for his unborn child. Vincent glanced at the cover letter, his eyes scanning the familiar logo. He grunted in acknowledgement. Right, the trust update. He'd forgotten. He picked up the stack, weighing it in his hand, his expression one of extreme impatience. He clearly had no intention of reading it. "They're just formalities mostly, dear," Audrey said, keeping her tone light and casual. "Standard procedure for establishing the baby's inheritance, but they've tabbed the pages you need to sign." She, following Marcus's instructions, had placed bright yellow stickers labeled "Sign Here" on the appropriate signature lines, making it as easy and automatic as possible. She was treating him like a busy celebrity signing autographs, not a billionaire relinquishing his empire. He flipped through the pages, his eyes glazing over the dense blocks of text. He saw legal jargon about trusts, asset schedules, appendices. It looked exactly like any other tedious corporate document he signed a dozen times a week. His mind was already elsewhere, on the speech he had to avoid at the gala, on the reservation he'd made at a private club for him and Simone. At 3:20 p.m., he picked up his pen, a heavy personalized Mont Blanc. Fine, where do I sign?" Audrey stood and leaned over the desk, her subtle, familiar lavender scent filling the air. She pointed with a perfectly manicured finger to the first yellow tab. "Here, and here." He signed the first page, his signature a sharp cut of ink. She flipped the page for him. "And here." He signed again. With every stroke of the pen, a new wire in his vast financial network was severed from him and rerouted to her. The voting rights to his majority stake in Sterling Capital, the deeds to his properties in the Hamptons and Aspen, the control codes for his main investment accounts. Cut, cut, cut. As he signed the final page, the one that enacted the power of Article 12 and made all other transfers legally binding and irrevocable, Audrey felt a deep, dizzying sense of vertigo. It was done. The trap had sprung. He was still the king, but he was sitting on a throne that no longer belonged to him. He pushed the stack of papers back across the desk toward her. "There you go. All set. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get ready for this ghastly party." He rose immediately, dismissing the moment, the papers, and her from his mind. He was completely unaware that he had just executed his own financial ruin. "Thank you, Vincent," Audrey said, with an impossibly serene voice. She gathered the documents, the ink still wet on his signature, and carefully placed them back in her clutch. "I'll have the courier return them to the lawyers right away. Go get ready. I'll see you downstairs in an hour." He nodded and walked out of the room without looking back. Audrey was left alone in his office, the clutch pressed to her chest. She looked around the room at the symbols of his power, the trophies of his conquests. They were now hers. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city spread below. It was no longer his kingdom in which she was a prisoner. It was her domain, won not by brute force, but by the quiet, underestimated intelligence of a woman he had never bothered to truly see. A silent, seismic shift had just occurred, and the only person in the world who knew it was the one he had wronged the most. The final toast. The air in the restaurant was thick with the scent of money and ambition. Vincent had chosen Le Bernardin, a temple of haute cuisine, for his date with Simone. He had skipped the gala at the earliest possible moment, leaving Audrey to make his excuses, claiming a sudden migraine. The lie had rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. He sat across from Simone in a plush, secluded booth, the city lights a dazzling backdrop. She wore a blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark contrast to the sea of subdued elegance Audrey would be wearing. "I hate that I had to see you with her tonight," Simone complained, swirling ruby-colored Cabernet in her glass. Even from across the room, standing there all maternal and smug. "It's just a show, you know that," Vincent said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "But the show is almost over." This was the lie he had been telling her for months, the carrot he dangled to ensure her compliance, the promise of a future where Audrey was a footnote. "Is it, Vincent?" she asked, her dark eyes searching his. "Because that belly of hers is getting quite prominent." "That," he said, leaning in and lowering his voice, "is a complication, but also an opportunity. It changes the timeline, but the outcome is the same, you and me." To punctuate his promise, he signaled the sommelier. "Bring us the Crystal Rosé 2008, he commanded, not even glancing at the wine list. It was a gesture of immense, casual wealth. At that exact moment, 9:53 p.m., miles away in the wood-paneled office of Marcus Kane, Audrey sat at a large conference table. The signed documents lay before her, now scanned and digitized. Marcus was on a secure line with a senior compliance officer at a private Swiss bank. Two forensic accountants hovered over their laptops, ready to execute a complex series of wire transfers. "The authorization codes are authenticated," Marcus said, nodding to Audrey. "We have the green light. We go live on my mark." Audrey took a deep, steady breath. Her hand rested on her stomach. This was it. The point of no return. "Now," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Execute." Back at Le Bernardin, the sommelier arrived with the champagne. The pale, glittering pink bottle was presented to Vincent for his approval. He nodded curtly, and the cork was eased out with a soft, expensive sigh. As the first drops of pink champagne splashed into Simone's crystal flute, a team of IT specialists, hired by Marcus, executed a digital command. Vincent Sterling's biometric and password credentials for the Sterling Capital servers were instantly revoked. The digital keys to his own kingdom were now invalid. The sommelier moved to Vincent's glass. As the champagne filled it, a second command was executed. The irrevocable transfer of the voting control of his majority shares, authorized by his own signature, was electronically filed with the SEC. On paper, he was still the CEO. In reality, he was a figurehead who could be ousted at any moment by the new majority shareholder, his wife. Vincent raised his glass. The champagne fizzed, the tiny bubbles catching the light. He looked at Simone, a woman he saw as his vibrant, exciting future. "A toast," he said, his voice ringing with self-satisfaction. "To new beginnings, to a future free of tedious obligations, to us." As their glasses clinked, a high, clear note in the restaurant's murmur, the final series of transfers began. Liquid assets, hundreds of millions in cash, stocks, and bonds, moved from Vincent-controlled accounts to new trust accounts solely controlled by Audrey. Property deeds were legally transferred. The credit lines he used to finance his luxurious lifestyle, including the black Amex in Simone's purse, were frozen pending review by the new account controller. He took a long, satisfying sip of the champagne. It was crisp, complex, with notes of strawberry and smoke. It tasted like victory. He was a master of the universe, celebrating another successful manipulation, another perfectly managed duality. He was toasting his own brilliance, his power, his ability to have everything he wanted. He had no idea he was drinking to his own ruin. He was celebrating his own wake, and he didn't even know what the corpse was. While he savored the taste of the expensive wine and the company of his mistress, the empire he had built, the fortune that defined him, was being systematically, legally, dismantled in complete silence. The entire structure of his life had been demolished, and he was sitting atop the rubble, admiring the view, completely unaware that nothing he looked at belonged to him anymore. The toast was a perfect final monument to his own spectacular arrogance. 6. The echoes of ruin. The first tremor of Vincent's collapsing world arrived not as a roar, but as a whisper of digital shame. After the lavish dinner, after more champagne and whispered promises, he reached for his wallet to pay the bill. He handed the waiter his personal Centurion card, the legendary black card that was his ultimate symbol of unlimited power. Moments later, the waiter returned, his expression a careful mask of professional apology. "I am terribly sorry, Mr. Sterling. The card has been declined." Vincent stared at him. "That is impossible. Run it again." "We have, sir. 3 times. Perhaps there is another card you would like to use?" A flush of irritation rose up Vincent's neck. He pulled out a Visa Platinum from another bank. "Try this one." The waiter returned again, his face even more pained. "My apologies, sir. This one is also—" Simone watched, her smile tightening. The glamour of the evening was evaporating under the harsh fluorescent light of a financial glitch. Vincent, flustered and furious, pulled out his phone to call the bank's private concierge line. He was put on hold. The triumphant master of the universe was now listening to tinny hold music, just like any other mortal. Finally, a nervous-sounding junior agent came on the line. Mr. Sterling? Yes, I see the issue. There appears to be a hold placed on all your personal accounts. A directive was issued by the principal trustee. I am the principal trustee, Vincent hissed into the phone. Our records show a change in trustee status, effective at 9:53 p.m. tonight, sir. The new principal trustee is listed as Audrey Vance. The name hit him like a physical blow. It didn't make sense. It was an error, an administrative error. He ended the call, tossed enough cash onto the table to cover the bill, one of the few times he'd carried that much, and stormed out of the restaurant, Simone following, her expression now one of cold evaluation. What was that, Vincent? She asked as they stood on the sidewalk. The city air suddenly cold. It's nothing, a banking glitch, he snapped, frantically trying to access his Sterling Capital corporate account on his phone to call his driver. Access denied. He tried again. Invalid credentials. Panic, an emotion he hadn't felt since he was a young man hustling his way up, began to snake through his gut. He hailed a common yellow cab, a humiliation in itself. During the tense, silent ride back to the Upper East Side, he frantically tried to call his CFO, his attorney, anyone. Every call went straight to voicemail. It was as if he had been digitally excommunicated from his own life. When the cab pulled up to his building, the final, crushing blow landed. He strode toward the grand entrance. But the doorman, a man who had greeted him by name for years, stepped forward to block his path. His face, a picture of misery. I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. I can't let you go up. What the hell are you talking about, Miguel? I live here. My instructions are clear, sir, from the new principal leaseholder. Mrs. Sterling is the only listed resident now. This was it. The moment the fog of denial was cleared by the brutal light of reality. This wasn't a glitch. This was an attack. This was a coup. Simone, who had been watching all of this, took a slow step backward. The man she had linked herself to, the industry titan, the source of limitless resources, was being locked out of his own home. His power had vanished. She saw him not as a lover, but as a stock that had just plummeted to zero. Vincent, her voice was stripped of any warmth. I think I should go. She didn't wait for a response. She turned, hailed another cab, and disappeared into the New York night, taking his illusions of a shared future with her. Vincent was left standing alone on the curb, the city lights that once seemed to celebrate him, now mocking his powerlessness. Humiliated and enraged, he finally received a text message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. Your belongings have been boxed and shipped to a storage unit in an industrial park outside the city. The address will be forwarded to you. Here is the number for a hotel I've booked for you for the next week. After that, you are on your own. He staggered into the lobby, where the concierge silently handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the elegant AV monogram. He ripped it open. Inside, in Audrey's perfect looping calligraphy, was a multi-page letter. It was not emotional or angry. It was a calm, detailed, devastating summary of his ruin. It described his infidelity, referencing the dates and locations from the private investigator's report. It explained in clear, concise terms the function of Article 12 of his prenuptial agreement, the clause he had never bothered to read. It informed him that she had assumed full control of the Sterling family trust, and by extension, the company and all its assets, to protect his unborn child's birthright from a father with compromised judgment. The letter concluded with a final paragraph that tore through his soul. You once called my pregnancy efficient and good for the brand. You were right. It has proven to be the most efficient business transaction of my life. You saw our son as an heir to your empire. Instead, this child has become the instrument of my liberation and your downfall. You underestimated me, Vincent. You saw me as another beautiful object you owned. You will find that of all your acquisitions, I was the only one who had a mind of her own. He crumpled the letter in his fist, his body trembling with a rage so profound it left him breathless. He had been utterly, completely, and perfectly defeated. He had been dismantled not by a corporate rival or a market crash, but by the quiet, unassuming woman he had relegated to the background of his life. She had used his own arrogance, his own legal documents, and his own son against him, in a maneuver so brilliant and ruthless it was something he would have admired in an enemy. He looked through the lobby's glass doors, toward the penthouse where the lights were on. He could almost imagine her standing there, one hand on her stomach, looking down at him. Audrey Vance, the curator of his life, had just curated his spectacular destruction. He was left with nothing but the expensive clothes on his back and the bitter taste of champagne in his mouth. He had toasted his future, unaware that he was already a ghost of the past. And so, Vincent Sterling's world ended not with a bang, but with a silent signature and the pop of a champagne cork. 7. The Architect of Justice. The chilling takeaway is that the greatest threats often come not from our declared enemies, but from the people we most underestimate. Audrey's story is one of incredible strength, a transformation from a silent partner to the architect of her own justice. It leaves us with a powerful question. Is this a story of cold-blooded revenge, or is it a story of radical self-preservation? Was Audrey's coup a masterclass in karma, or a warning about the devastating power of secrets? Vincent lost a fortune, but in the end, what he truly lost was the respect and love of a woman who was worth more than his entire empire. What do you think? Drop your comment below. Do you believe Vincent got what he deserved, or did Audrey go too far? And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next real-life drama we uncover.